Hey, Christy, thank you for joining here in Southern California. I have rainy weather. It's not very often I can share that with people up in the Pacific Northwest. So thank
And
you
I have
for.
sunshine.
I know exactly. It's opposite. Thanks for joining the podcast. Great to have you. You've been an executive of a number of different organizations on the vendor side. I think what's also unique that you've had that perspective is you've also been an executive on the end user side over at Citibank. So it'd be great to hear your perspective on how you've been in those different roles, what you've learned, and what you've also learned that the customers can be challenged with, and how to solve those problems. And then we'll talk a little bit about resilience. But let's just start out with your background. Share a little bit about what you're passionate about, how you became a CEO. I think that's always a great story.
So my background is in software development. So my first software development job was writing communication network software for the Inmarsat-C satellite network. And I was originally working in Canada. I'm originally Canadian. And then I went through a number of different tech companies in Canada and was at Sun Microsystems when we were launching Java. And then was asked to come down to Silicon Valley at that time, it was supposed to be an 18-month stint, which turned into a 27-year-long stint. So,
nice.
The kinds of companies that I've worked with, I've been very lucky and very blessed. I think what I get super passionate about is when technology is reaching an inflection point and really has the ability to open up an ecosystem. And so if you take a look at whether it was Linux or Java or mobile or digital banking or almost any sort of part of technology that I've been passionate about and invested time with, it's been because there's this huge opportunity to open up an entire ecosystem and really change an industry. And so I'm a tech person first.
Nice. And software developer first, it sounds like.
Well, not anymore. Yeah.
not anymore, right? But you have that kind of perspective. What was your first CEO job? How did you get that CEO job?
So I had been working with I've been with Motorola for quite a long period of time and really have been a part of that big shift over to smartphones and Android. The last year or so that I was within Motorola, we had started an enterprise mobility business unit. And we grew it, quite quickly to quite a reasonable size. And then we ended up selling Motorola to Google. Mm-hmm. And I took a bit of time, and that's when I went into Citigroup. And but this concept about sort of mobility and enterprise was something that was really unfolding as smartphones were really kind of eating into both what mobile computing looked like and how enterprise work was being done. Mm-hmm. And there was a company called Good Technology that I had been familiar with and had actually spoken to before I went to Citigroup. And then they sort of reemerged back. And actually, it was the chairman and the acting CEO at the time that sort of reapproached me and said, "No, we've all talked about it. We've just decided that you need to stop doing what you're doing and come do this." And so it just ended up being too big of an opportunity for me to move over. So I'd run, a sort of a $1 billion P&L before. So it wasn't my first time thinking about all the different parts of the business. Mm-hmm. But it was my first time sort of stepping into a direct CEO role and in quite an exciting part of the market at the time.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I think mobile was a big deal. Still is a big deal and a big problem that continues to kind of keep getting bigger here with security as well. So it sounds like you've had, like you said, kind of corporate experience working at a bunch of different companies. What was your favorite CEO job? Like what was one that you're like, well, this was interesting and unique and really taught you about, what you're both made out of as a CEO, but also, what kind of challenged you, right?
I think that's almost like asking me which of my 4 children is my favorite child. I don't think you can choose.
You have to answer all of them then, and you have to have 4 different. No, I'm just kidding.
I think that you learn something new each and every time, and I think Good was. I'd say they weren't a startup. They were it was definitely the smallest thing I'd ever done at the time when I stepped in, because I'd been at, Apple and Motorola and Citigroup mm-hmm. and big organizations. And this was a company that was kind of on a trajectory, but certainly had its number of challenges. I think the piece that I get most excited about when I'm coming into a company is really, sort of looking at what is that long-term picture and then breaking it down into what are the very tactical things we need to do to get there, right? And I think as a CEO, you have to be able to pivot between the two, right? You can have a sign in here somewhere that says vision without execution is not, it's not real. Hallucination, I think, is the word. And so, I think that what sort of engineering that machine, it's a different kind of software development, isn't it? You're sort of taking a look at a big audacious problem and sort of breaking it down into the pieces and figuring out the right elements of talent and IP and tools to kind of be able to make it a reality. And I think that's the part of the job that I love the most.
Agreed. It's like I studied biology in college, and I manage and work with a lot of CTOs and architects and engineers. It's just like a business architecture thing, right? How do you get the different puzzle pieces together, and then how do you get them all to support each other? I think is kind of the challenge, right? So totally agree with you there. So Christy, let's talk a little bit about Absolute. What are the puzzle pieces that you're putting together over there, and what are you excited about around Absolute, and also this topic of resilience? It's a big topic that we're all thinking a lot about these days. So why don't you share a little bit about your perspective on that?
So Absolute is not a young company. We've been around for quite a long period of time. And like the other platforms I talked about, when I first met the company, I didn't know who they were. They were responsible for doing a lot of what I call more IT focused use cases, like track and trace and lost laptops. But the part that just kind of blew my mind is that they had this cybersecurity platform that's embedded in almost every PC that's shipped over the last decade or so. It's over 600 million devices. And that little tiny piece of technology sort of wakes up before the operating system and sort of, is a anchor, sort of it's something solid you can stand security products on top of. Mm-hmm. So while for the longest time, their platform was really focused on finding lost laptops and working within, kids would take laptops home from school and they'd get stolen, and we'd, work with law enforcement to retrieve them. This concept of resilience and being able to heal things from within inside was just this massive idea that the company had been working on for a little while. They had started this project around self-healing applications. So if you see an application, call it a critical application, like a EDR, XDR, or device management, something that was important to the compliance and the security integrity of that device, you had the ability to actually help, right? To be this sort of layer of assistance. And that was kind of the big idea. And I came into the company 6 years ago, and I think we've pretty much designed the entire company around that resilience strategy. We started with self-healing applications and what we call application health. We think about secure access and network resilience, and how can you securely connect in a highly resilient way to applications that matter. We started working on device resilience. So we announced something a little while ago called rehydration, which means we can do essentially bare metal reinstalls or bare metal rebuilds of devices, even when they're remote, which is a particularly difficult thing. I don't know of anyone else that can actually do that. So it gives us the ability to kind of look at the bigger picture of cybersecurity, what's working and what's not working, and where things aren't working. Is there something we can do from within the hardware itself to actually make those applications or that security posture more resilient?
So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges you see with customers, and how are you guys going about solving those problems? I know one thing you brought up was the CrowdStrike incident, right? And that was something that many folks were impacted by. Everyone had different strategy to get up and running, because everyone has been coming up with different strategies to solve this problem, and some of them didn't have a strategy before it happened, right? So that's just one example, but there's so many examples of resilience, right? So,
and I think when we think about resilience, we think a lot about ransomware, or we think about, there's a whole host of cyber strategies that can have the same impact. But the CrowdStrike event was really sort of a focusing moment for our industry, because I think people got the global impact of when something goes wrong, like how long does it take to put the pieces back together?
Mhm.
And we've been talking about this for many years, right? We were saying we started on this journey pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic, when everybody sent their employees home, that just amplified the issue, right? If you
Mhm.
have 10,000 devices that just got hit by something, they've now disconnected from your network because they've become frozen or unsafe, and you don't want them to connect to your network anymore. Then what do you do? And it can't be, running from desk to desk with a thumb drive and typing in BitLocker passcodes, right? That just isn't going to scale when you have 10,000 people all over the world. And I think that's why that was a big focusing moment. I was having a conversation with a CISO, but months before that, and said, so what happens if you get hit by ransomware? And they said, well, we have a plan. And I said, you have 5,000 remote workers. And they said, we have a plan. We have a subset of people that come into a secure location, and then they can start conducting transactions again. And I'm like, and then what? And they're like, well, no, we're like back online. Yeah, but then what? Like, you've got 5,000 PCs out in people's homes and living rooms or in, remote offices. How do you get those people back online? And the answer was, you unplug them, you box them up, you FedEx them home, and somebody sends you a new one or a clean one. Well, that's just not the answer, right? For a whole host of reasons: cost, time, scale. And so, that's one of those moments where we looked at that and said, look, we can do that. We can do better, right? We can make this. So the big thing that I think people don't spend time thinking about when they're doing their tabletop exercises or their cyber drills is they don't think about the long tail of resilience, right? Do they think about containing, like, did I prevent the bad thing from happening? And if it got through, how do I stop the bad thing? How do I contain it? How do I clean it? But then there's the whole back to work tail of the event that often you read these press releases and you see organizations taking months, quarters to say it's going to take us 3 months or 3 quarters to clean up the effect of that ransomware attack or that BSOD event or whatever it happened to be. And that's just a huge gap, right? So the business impact was not the strike so much as it was, how long it takes you to put the pieces back together. And that's where I think we can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a number of different components to resilience, to your point, right? And I think there's a long tail that incorporate that. There's in the software world, like, I think we've gotten good about solving that problem. We solve it in the cloud or somewhere in the data center. We have checks and balances. We then push it out, and everyone can access that SaaS solution, right? But what happens when the solution is on 5,000 devices, right? And that's because everyone's actually accessing that SaaS solution through those 5,000 devices, and so great, everyone can now access it, but no one can actually access it. And I think that's
kind of the move to cloud has amplified the complexity, because if you think about it, pre-agentic AI and I think the momentum of the industry for the last decade has been, let's move all the intelligence to the cloud. So let's feed all the data into the brain in the cloud, and then it will decide when something scary is happening, and then it will send a kill signal or a cleanup or a script or something down to the device. And so when those devices are remote and you can't get that signal to the device, that's where you run into trouble, right? And I think, we had been saying, listen, there's a part of that intelligence that needs to be inside the device itself. And we're so blessed we have such a great ecosystem with, Dell and Lenovo and HP and 25 other partners, Microsoft, where we can kind of take a look at this from inside the hardware and say, listen, I get you can't call home right now, but I think the right thing to do is this, right? And so we have another way of making that device more resilient.
What you said, some of the devices you can't actually access. What do you mean by that? Are there some industry specific examples that you're referring to, like manufacturing or other ones?
Well, I think in a moment of distress, that device can't call home. We call it dark devices, right? And CrowdStrike was a big event of that, where those devices were getting themselves into a state that even if you knew what to do to clean that infection, you couldn't get that signal to that device in time to tell the OS to stop, right? And we could, because we could do it from underneath. But I think we can. And I think that that is a common phenomenon. And I think people don't understand how frequent that is. We put out research every year where we report out how frequent those devices or those controls become dark. So what I mean by dark is Patch Tuesday happened and the device unencrypted and it took in a bunch of updates, and some things conflicted, right? If you think about how many applications are running on a device, there's over 100 applications on a standard enterprise PC, probably more than 10 to 15 security applications specifically. When they're all updating at different times and different intervals, things are just going to go wrong, right? They're just going to decay over time. Our research says it could be 30-40% of any given device that, or any number of your devices amongst your fleet that are likely out of compliance, meaning something isn't calling home. And that's where we talked about application health and self-healing. Like let's see that from the device's perspective, and then repair, restore, reconfigure it. Because if it's not running, it can't help you, right? And that, whatever the cloud service is that's trying to talk to that thing, it's like the other side of the phone has dropped the connection, right? They've just seen you hang up on them, but they can't call you back.
Mm-hmm.
That's where devices kind of get themselves into a scary state.
Yep. So there's a lot of other technologies that surround this area you're talking about around devices, right? You have UEM, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And you have, a lot of different endpoint management solutions. So how, like, if you're doing that as a customer, where is the gap that they're not covered with?
Sure.
And, how do you guys think about that holistically? How do you holistically manage the device, to your point? Because there's so many different attack vectors. So maybe kind of walk us through how you guys have thought about solving that problem, because that's kind of what you said at the beginning, right? This is the puzzle pieces, right? Is there 9 puzzle pieces? Is there 100? How does it kind of work?
I walked into so we, as an industry, have had a long conversation about the number of agents going on these devices and the number of applications, and folks have been big fans of consolidating. And I remember walking into a customer room once, and they had been whiteboarding on the wall, and I think they had over 75 agents that they were trying to get down to 35. Okay. So it's a big issue, and I like to say, look, we're not hunting bad guys. Like I'm not looking for the ransomware. I'm not looking for the insider. Right there, you have bought amazing technology from industry leaders on how to do those things. UEM's another one, right? We do have device management capabilities, but we are not an MDM, right? There are other people who are doing Intune or Workspace ONE, or there's a lot of solutions. You've built your stack, right? Our job is to be the immune system underneath that and make sure that stack is intact. So, because almost everything in that stack, if it's an agent, it is sitting sort of on or sort of essentially on the operating system, right, at various different levels. And so there is some layer, you would imagine some of those actually reach quite deep into the operating system, and fair enough, but they're still sitting, operating system and above. And we're the only thing that's sort of sitting kind of beside, right? We have a little bit of a head start. And so we're not really looking to solve all of the attack vectors. We're trying to make sure that the big investment you made in preventing that risk or managing that risk on that device stays whole and stays intact, and that you have that last line of defense when something goes wrong, mm-hmm. right? When something that is deeply wired into the operating system, or the operating system itself gets into a state, right? You have another way of kind of restoring that device or sort of getting it back online. So some of the applications we persist, which means we make them kind of undeletable and self-healing. It is things like SCCM and BitLocker. It is things like Intune. It is things like, your VPN. We're not there to displace them. We're there to protect them.
What are can you share some customer stories around how customers were solving this problem? And then, you kind of, educated them on how to solve this problem and how that's kind of shifted their perspective. Like you said, the 75 agents down to 35 agents is a good one. But maybe walk us through some customer examples, both with customers who are, advanced and very mature, to customers who may not be as advanced and mature, but want to be, right?
Sure.
Because everyone is somewhere in between.
Sure. So I would say, in some of our largest organizations, by the way, I think of us as horizontal. So I don't think that what we do changes dramatically between those environments. Mm-hmm. Who could be managing it could be a slight distinction. So, I think the role of the MSP is really important in this conversation, because when we get into that mid-market, it is getting increasingly difficult for even what I would call small and mid-sized enterprise. I'm not talking about SMB, but I would say it's getting increasingly difficult for even mid-sized companies to do all the things that you're going to see in like a large healthcare, a large federal, or a large financial services environment.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah.
And I think the role of the MSP is really critical, because they help supplement that. And in some of those cases, it really is the MSP that's using our technology, not the end user, right? The MSP is using us because we help them deliver a better service level to their customer, because they don't have to deploy human capital or other tools, right? There's a lot of other tools out there that can tell you when something may have gone dark. There's not a lot of other things that can help you fix it. So that remediation part is an important piece. So I would say, some of our large organizations started very much on the, what I'd say the IT management side. So employee onboarding and offboarding is a huge one, right? Especially when people started working remotely. But I have one healthcare customer that sort of probably does maybe 30,000 device freezes, and we do BIOS level freezes and wipes. We issue a certificate, right, within a year, because they have a very mobile population of healthcare workers, contractors coming in and out. And then, when we start with sort of that set of use cases, and then we can bring to them the data that says, here, we've looked at how the rest of your security stack is performing. And with the same platform, if you turn on persistence with these 5, 7, 10 applications, right, here's the improvement in compliance and integrity in your security profile that we can deliver back. And so the return on investment is really kind of modeled around how are we helping them get more out of what they've already invested. Our resilience, our secure access capability, which is a zero trust a set of products for secure access, can hook into this concept of comply to connect, right? Is your device compliant with your security profiles? And if it's not, should you let it connect, right? Should you let it actually connect to certain things? I realize that sounds like a simple linear relationship, but if you think about remote workers, you almost have to let them connect to figure out if they're compliant, and then decide whether you're going to let them to continue to connect. And that's a little bit backwards, right? Again, we can kind of work behind the scenes, and you'll know whether that device is compliant before it's ever connected. So a lot of the use cases with our customers start very simply, right? You have a lot of people moving around in the organization. How do we make sure you never lose sight of your assets? You never, one of the world's largest banks started exactly that way with their MSP partner, right? How do we just make sure they can always see their assets and they can always maintain a connection to them? And then in time, right, we've been building on the broader resilience capabilities, especially when their workers went to go work from home. How do we make sure that they're always protected and always contained?
Okay. So let's talk about, Absolute. You guys have, sounds like, made some acquisitions recently. You guys have been building up a portfolio of products. Tell us a bit about as you kind of joined the company, built the strategy. How has that strategy changed as you've matured the company, and where you guys are going?
So I think it's evolved quite a lot. When I first joined 6 years ago, we were still doing mostly what I would call asset management, tracking, and tracing. We had introduced the concept of self-healing applications, but this concept of resilience as the core of the portfolio has really been our focus ever since then. We started with application healing and collecting the telemetry, showing enterprises where their security was working and where it wasn't working, and how very simply we can make the hardware itself sort of protect their security posture. We had built up quite a large catalog of applications that we were persisting and healing, right? So the way that works is the customer sort of has a catalog of apps. They can say, here's the 10, 15 things that I want to make sure always work in my environment. When the pandemic happened, we saw the number one thing that was breaking was access. It was legacy VPNs were never built to support 95% of the population, and zero trust. So a lot of the solutions were not necessarily having the scale or the user experience that customers could really move wholeheartedly, or they were still using it as a VPN in the sky. They weren't really deploying sort of intelligent zero trust.
Yep.
in the way that it was designed. And so we did an acquisition of a company called NetMotion, which was most well known for being a very scalable, very secure, very resilient secure access solution, very broadly deployed with first responders and highly mobile, highly secured environments. And we said, what if we could take this and make it a truly resilient zero trust SaaS platform? And that's really been the focus there. And that's been working quite nicely. It gives us the ability to do that entire comply to connect experience, which is I think a big part of our focus right now. We just acquired a company called 6sense, which was vulnerability management and patch management. How you proactively think about your patching strategy and how you deploy sort of remote playbooks fit very well with kind of what we were doing with application and self-healing. And so that's a nice, I think, extension to our resilience product. I think customers who have our resilience product have been super appreciative of seeing that sort of fold in. And the patch management solutions, I mean, this is a busy market and there's a lot of vendors there. But when we were looking at the data, many companies have 2-3 solutions. And why are they layering them? They're layering them because this sort of, legacy approach to patch management is not working. You need something that is truly resilient and anchored in the hardware itself. Mm-hmm. So it's a very nice sort of extension. I think that you'll continue to see us look for opportunities to extend the concept of resilience. I talked about this device rehydration piece, which we just launched or released in the last couple of weeks, which allows you to run remote playbooks. So you can bare metal reinstall remotely, or you could point to the last known safe backup if you have some sort of backup architecture already put out there. It's really sort of how do we manage that long tail of recovery after an event happens. Although one of our customers surprised us, customers are always the best leader in terms of where innovation needs to go next. And they said, we had one customer who said to us, that sounds really great for sort of remediating after a big event, but why wouldn't you just run rehydration every 30 days? If you know that there are, bad things sort of lurking in devices and you just haven't found them yet, why wouldn't you just continuously refresh your fleet? Mm-hmm. Wasn't our design philosophy, but it's one of those moments you go, that's something. Let's go do more of that. Let's go think about that.
Nice. So it sounds like you guys have taken the, I'm going to say, bottoms up approach on devices and security versus the top down approach, which is the very top would probably be cloud, right? and then applications, and then platforms, and then infrastructure, and it's really kind of at the, like you said, it's kind of the operating system level, and then you guys are kind of building up the puzzle pieces around that, right, as you kind of go up the stack. 100% agree with what
Absolutely. And we're guided by why didn't that work, right? Endpoint rehydration happened because someone in the building clicked on something and their device was frozen, and they happened to be in the building, and we happened to be nearby watching, and IT and security came over and did their thing, and we just said, what happens if you're not here? What would have happened? How would we have done that differently? I think a lot of our use cases get driven by, the application health. I was such a huge advocate of that in the beginning because I'd been a CEO of an insider threat company that a lot of times when a bad thing happened, somebody would say, go pull the logs, and we'd get, apparently the agent stopped running 2 weeks ago, and we don't have the latest and greatest. And you just got to scratch your head and go, this can't be that hard to solve. There has to be another way to ensure that these applications are resilient and sticky.
That's awesome. So we start out talking about resilience, and that was the thing that you were excited about a couple of years ago. It sounds like this continues to be a challenge and an opportunity for customers and for Absolute. What are you excited about? What's coming next? Whether it be resilience or something else that connects with resilience, or we can talk about the topic of the day, AI, and if you choose to, agentic, which every CEO has to come up with a plan for. So let's talk a little bit about what you're excited about, moving forward here. Next.
Well, I would say what I'm most excited about for where we are is that I remember saying a lot just not too many years ago that one of the challenges we had, why Absolute was not as well-known brand as many other cybersecurity companies our size, is that CIOs and CISOs weren't coming into those fiscal years going, resilience is in my top 3 funding priorities, right? It was like malware detection or, identity. There was a list of things, and resilience just wasn't a thing, right? And I think what we're most excited about, good or bad, is that people now understand, right? We're seeing resilience come from every direction, and it doesn't always mean the same thing. But I think this concept of how does an organization snap back and restore itself and not have the long tail damage on their business? I think, it's validating that a lot of the work that we've done, all of a sudden, folks are going, I get it. We have a capability of licensing resilience out to other ISVs. So if there's another security application that just wants this capability built into their own stuff, they can just sort of access that through us. But I heard from many years from a lot of the ISVs, I don't have a resilience problem. My stuff works. I think that the realization that it could have been anybody. Everybody's stuff stops working at some point in time, big or little. And so that part, I think, is what we're excited about right now, is that we can be really helpful, and we can reach out and show folks different strategies for how to make themselves more resilient. For where we're going, right, I think that this agent, I know you said there's an obligatory AI plug you have to sort of put in there, but this pendulum swinging from the cloud back to the endpoint, I think, is the right answer, right? We swung so far the other direction where folks were like, we don't want all of the intelligence sitting on the device. It has to be in the cloud. I think what this new generation sort of gives us the ability to do is to think about, listen, there are problems or questions we can answer only by looking at data in the aggregate, right? Where we take a look at global data. And obviously that's going to happen, in the cloud or in your own AI factory. But once you understand kind of what the common models are, right, there is so much that the device should be able to self-diagnose and repair itself. And so this pendulum swinging and rebalancing and allowing the device to be more intelligent and take advantage of that self-healing and run those playbooks locally without being sort of told from the brain in the sky, I think that is going to drive a lot of value for customers, right, who are going to continue to have largely distributed workforces, and the concerns around ransomware and other kinds of attacks is not going to go away anytime soon. So I think it's clearly something we're excited about and something we're embracing, but I think it's mostly because it's a directionally sort of where we need to be headed anyways, right? This is a new set of tools over some period of time that will be able to deliver against that.
I think as an industry for a long time, we said, okay, we're going to stop everything from getting in, right? We knew things were getting in, but we weren't ready to have that conversation yet. And that was not a priority, right? Why do you think that has now shifted, right? It was always about stopping, now all of a sudden everyone's accepted, okay, great, they're getting in, but that has been happening the whole time, right? So what you talk to a lot of customers, you talk to other CEOs. Why do you think that narrative has now changed, and now we've accepted as an industry, okay, great, now we need to do the resilience thing, we need to do micro-segmentation, we need to do asset management better, we need to do all of these things. What do you think is driving that kind of across the industry?
I think it's the complexity. I think that I certainly have found customers who feel like it's their fault, right? That they just weren't mature enough. They just didn't spend enough. Their guys didn't take the latest version. Like I think as customers were enterprises were sort of always looking inward and saying, I'm sure it must be us, right? I'm sure it must be us.
Yeah, we can do better, yeah.
Right. If I were, XYZ Bank, I'm sure I'd have this under control, but it's because I'm smaller, or because, my data is not perfect, right? My data is not perfect, which is why the tool required to look at the data, well, it must be my fault. I have to go clean my data, right? There's all sorts of reasons why the customer is being programmed to be told that it's their fault. But if you just look at the facts, the number of security applications, the amount of technology we've layered on these devices year after year after year to try to prevent the bad things from happening, to a certain extent creates a new vulnerability, right? Because now you have this impossible test matrix of hundreds of different versions of the latest version of Windows with different status of patching, with 100 different applications on some unique network configuration. There's just no practical way that vendors or customers can do the many-to-many testing to make sure that it all just works. And so there's maybe a little bit of a fatigue, but also a little bit of a reality check that you could be doing a fantastic job. But so are the folks on the other side trying to get in. And the complexity is kind of beyond us. It's why AI is going to be very helpful, but it's also why there's this sort of reality that it's never going to be enough. There will always be something new that you didn't test for, either as a vendor or as a customer. And therefore, we got to kind of lock arms and think about how we become more resilient.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the last. So that was all great, but I think the last piece was really, an important piece that everyone should be thinking about, right? Like, we've been maturing our security practices. We've been spending money. We cannot spend our way out of it, right? We need to fix the critical components. And so instead of just focusing on the attack vector, we need to focus on everyone's going to get hacked. And now everybody has, right? Everyone's had that experience. Before, everyone's like, no, that's not going to be me, right? That was just that other bank or that other manufacturer. Oh, they're a bigger target. Some of the biggest targets now are, like you said, the mid-market companies, manufacturing companies, because it's just so easy, right? So maybe just as we kind of conclude here.
By the way, my favorite excuse, just to interrupt, favorite excuse that I hear from folks is that, nobody's interested in us, right? Like we don't have that much interesting data. It's not like we're the federal government. And so my data is not that interesting, or my data is all in the cloud. My users don't have data on their endpoint devices because we put it all in the cloud. Like I think these are the myths that need to get busted. You could have a fantastic sort of cloud sync strategy, but I guarantee you, your users are putting unique things. And as AI gets faster, unique things will be generated and created on those devices that have no chance of getting back to some sort of secure repository and fast enough for you to be comfortable that you're going to have 100% of what you need when a bad thing happens.
Yeah. Another good, just along the lines is, like, all my SaaS providers will help me back up when I get hacked. No, they will not. I have had that experience myself, right? Like, if there wasn't a hacking issue, we had an analyst who literally lost a report. And we're like, hey, can we get it back? They're like, oh, that's not in your SLA. That's your data. We store it, but we can't give it back to you. So, there's so many challenges right now with the proliferation, to your point on the complexity. So on that piece, just around attacks and AI, like, is there anything interesting that you're seeing that's kind of popped up in the last couple of months in terms of new things that you're seeing? Is it just kind of the same old stuff? Now it's just a velocity, and volume problem. What are you kind of seeing as you look across the threat landscape, knowing that while we're having this conversation, a new thing is happening? Across the whole industry.
I think this whole concept of authentication is certainly one of the things that I think causes me concern. I've seen all the same things you have, right? I've seen the deep fakes. I think that I've seen the generated attacks. But I think this, we've come through a couple of decades where folks, like, the more you published about yourself, the better you were, right? And the happier you were. Folks were posting what they had for dinner and where they went on vacation. And so now, we're going to come into an era where, the thing and the thing you have as being your two ways of authenticating yourself becomes an increasingly harder problem, because, the things I know as if I were an adversary, right? The things I know about somebody I'm trying to target, call it your one of your administrators that is key to an executive, and the bad guy figures if they get her laptop, they get access to, they get more information in. So they have this indirect path in. Right? What you can learn about somebody and the speed at which you can learn it and sort of funnel that into a deep fake, it's increasingly alarming. And so I think that, we've thought about biometrics, we've thought about, all sorts of technology solutions. And interestingly, we're sort of falling back on, old forms of, like, what's your secret family safe word, or what's your, we're getting to
That's right.
the kind of authentication. We're going back to the future when we think about how, because a lot of things that we've been allowing ourselves to trust are going to become compromised, and it's happening really, really fast.
So you're saying when you're on social media, you shouldn't be talking about your best friend that you had in high school, or your first pet's name that you had, because those will be combed and they'll figure out your security questions.
I just think about all the data that you've put out in social networks, all of the data that's been inadvertently compromised through other companies' hacks, all of the and my ability to say to you, yeah, if you really knew me, where did what was the name of my elementary school? Like I just think the time to answer these questions is not, I'm not trying to alarm anyone, but I think we just have to be sort of shields up when we think about our sort of, for us and our families, our personal safety and security, and how we protect our employees and our enterprises, right? And just know that things are happening lightning fast. So you're going to need to be able to recover.
Yep, certainly is. All right, well, Christy, thank you for joining the podcast. We'll conclude it here, but it was great to hear kind of your background and your, how you became a CEO. Appreciate your perspective on resilience, and how as an industry we've now accepted that, we now need to be resilient, and now we need to manage that along with the attacks, and looking forward to seeing where Absolute goes in the next couple of years, and we'll be following you guys. So thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
All right.